This conference will now be recorded.
I got 1 minute.
This conference will now be recorded.
6 o'clock. Okay, it's now 6 o'clock, and I'm going to call this special meeting of the Town Council to order. First thing I'm going to do is tell everybody the reason we're having a special meeting. Okay, it's not an emergency meeting; it's a special meeting. And according to our ordinance, it says special meetings of the Town Council may be called by the mayor in cases of emergency, and this is not an emergency, or when the mayor's judgment, the good of the town requires it. And that's why we're having the meeting, to get things squared away and to try to get everybody on the same page. Now, we had the last council meeting, we had a proposal put up by Councilwoman Keating about not raising the millage and by adjusting some funds to do what we needed to do. And that vote went through, and there were only 6 people present at the meeting. Mr. Kinkham was not here. And that was voted on and passed 4-2. Okay. On Mr. Kinkham's return, he looked at it and he brought up some issues that we had, saying that it couldn't be a first reading because first readings have to be made at regular council meetings. That was one issue. Then he got together with a couple other council members and they decided that a different way to do it and a different way that they wanted to do it. And things were just getting out of hand. And the bottom line is we have to have a budget done by July 1st. And if we have to have 2 readings, we may not have a budget done by July 1st. And we're really not sure, that's by state mandate, we're really not sure what the consequences are for not having a budget by July 1st. But what we need to do is we need to get our budget taken care of. And so basically what I want to do is I want to have the town administrator express again where we are. I want to have the town attorney tell us on where we are and where we could go and what it takes to get there. And then I want to have council discussion on what we're going to do to fix the problem if we do. Okay, there is no public comments during this course here that we're doing right now. So we're going to start out with the town administrator and let you go ahead, sir.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, good evening. So I just provided this, and you've seen these slides before, so I just basically put them in a box, slide by slide, just to indicate where we are. So on May 23rd, there was a first reading by staff, and that was the original budget, recommended budget. And these are what you have seen before. The deficit was at $489,105. And to accomplish that deficit, we needed to basically increase the millage by 4, and there was a transfer of $169,105 from the fund balance reserve. So that was the original recommended budget on May the 23rd. On June the 1st, there was a first reading, which option number 1 was considered at that meeting. There were 2 options. In that case, we did some reductions to the deficit of the budget, which is revised at $318,281.50, and then the recommended revenue source was 4 millage at $320,000. So then we moved forward to publish the second reading on June the 13th. The second reading was recommended to the council for adoption. And there it is to your left. However, on the right, because there was a major change from the adopted motion on June the 13th, the motion reverted to a first reading and approved. And the new motion basically was to transfer American Rescue Act funds, which is ARPA, to cover the pier expenses and to transfer the local accommodations tax funds in the like amount to the general fund at that number, $318,281.50. So that's where we are today. With this motion, based on our chapter 2, we have to have a first reading of this motion at the June 27th meeting, which is going to push us into July. The second meeting, the first meeting in July, but it's the second Tuesday for the second reading, which means we would not meet our June 30th deadline.
Okay, and so let's look at our options. Our options are, if we use the one that we have right now on the board, we're not gonna meet our June deadline. Okay? It's not saying that we're not gonna have a budget, we're just not gonna have the budget by July 1st. Okay? Let's look at the other options that we have. And Jerry, do you wanna explain that to us?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, as I understand it, there are, part of the reason for today's meeting, there are requests to basically then take on a possible third budget option. Now, by doing that, we will almost certainly push even further out beyond the July 1st deadline, because we would now have to have an additional second reading, we'd have to have a change. But the only option that I foresee in order to comply with the July 1st deadline is to have a motion to rescind and amend the action taken at the prior meeting, which would essentially negate the vote that was taken and take us back to the original proposal, which was funded by $4 million increase, which has already had a first reading, and then there could be a second reading prior to the July 1st deadline. Now, the choice for council to make is to essentially make a determination as to which it feels is most important. If it is more important to fund the budget and not do it by increasing the millage property taxes, but instead through some other means, then I think we can proceed as we are. We will not likely be, we will still not comply with the July 1st deadline, but again, I'm not aware of any statutory or other automatic penalty that occurs that the town would be facing, but it's obviously you want to be in compliance with statute if you all can. Now, the other thing is to say, if the priority is to comply with the July 1st deadline, then given how far back it's taken to try to get to a budget proposal, the way I foresee doing that is a motion which would rescind and amend prior change that was done at the last council meeting. That is to say, the change that shifted the funds, and that would revert back to the original budget that was funded by the $4 million increase, and for which we've already had a first read. So I think the first thing is a decision on which council views to be more important and more imperative.
Now, let me get this straight, that if we go back and we rescind with the one that is now, that has to be done by a 2/3 vote.
I believe that's correct.
Which means that the 5 people have to vote out of the 7.
That's correct.
Okay. So let's look at our options again. Our options are to go back to the first reading, which is going to take 5-2 vote in order for it to pass. Or to keep on the track we're on right now, and the track that we're on right now from the vote we took last week, that we're going to have the first reading again on the 27th meeting, and then the second reading in the first or second week in July, at the first regular meeting in July, which is going to put us past the July 1st deadline. And any way we look at it is going to be past the July 1st deadline, with the exception of 5 people voting to rescind the one before. So council needs to make a decision on whether it's more important to stay voted on, which is not raising the millage rate and adjusting funds in order to do it, and or to raise the millage rate and to have the five out of seven vote for it. So with that, I will open the floor to discussion, and I'm going to let everybody talk. So we'll go one at a time, and then who wants to be first?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to ask a question. All that happened last time is they made a motion and you deemed it as significant change. When that kicks in part of chapter 2, section 166B, it says it has to go to be rewritten and brought back for first reading at the next regular meeting. So there is not a first reading of that, if I'm reading that correct.
That's right. Under what I'm looking at, the ordinance that you cited, that yes, the motion is made at the meeting that then says at the next regular meeting would be the first reading. That's why under that, with that change, I think we still likely puts us past the July 1st deadline, because under the change we made last time, you would then, change was made at the meeting, then would have to have the next regular meeting for the first reading. The second, one after that would then be the second reading. That would put us past.
Right. Why do we have to rescind that vote?
Well, we don't. The question is, given that the track we're on appears to put us past the July 1st deadline, if we are seeking to find a way to stay in compliance with the July 1st deadline, then the only option that I foresee is seeking to rescind the prior vote that was done at the last meeting, which would put us back in the original budget proposal that has already had a first reading, and then we could have a second.
Could we not have a first reading of that proposal tonight and a second reading on the 27th?
It's not a regular meeting.
Doesn't have to be a regular meeting.
I'm sorry.
The only thing,
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your proposal.
okay, could we make a motion to adopt first reading of the budget that we did on June 1st and have the second reading on the 27th? And not have to worry about rescinding what took place on the 13th.
Well,
Because right now, we do not have a first reading on the floor.
correct, the first, given that was, the first reading would have to be at the next regular meeting, which is scheduled for, I believe, the 27th.
Correct.
Okay. So I think if I understand you correctly, you're saying, can we just jump ahead of having it at the regular meeting to having it at today's special meeting? Is that correct?
I'm asking the question. I'd like to make a motion to do that, but if it's not proper, I won't do it.
I was just making sure that's your question.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I believe that would have to be it has to be at the next regular meeting. So with this being a special meeting, I don't believe we're able to do that. That's the whole point. The last regular scheduled meeting, we had likely a significant change. That means you have to have the first reading, regular scheduled meeting, and the next one after that. So this is a special meeting.
So I cannot make a motion tonight.
I don't believe so.
That's why I was asking the question.
Sure, absolutely. And I want to make sure I answer the question that you're asking, not the.
You just did. Thank you.
The one thing that I wanted, before we go any further on it, I wanted to ask the town administrator if we had talked about this afternoon, but I want him to tell us and tell everybody that, based on what you know, and you've talked to the municipal association and talked to who you can, what are the consequences of not having our budget done in a timely manner? I mean, I know in the federal government, when they close down the government, they have to send everybody home and nobody gets to work until they get a continuing resolution to get it done. But it doesn't sound like that's the way it's done in the state of South Carolina.
Yeah, in North Carolina, it is very different. It's very, state statute is there for a reason. In North Carolina, we have a local government commission that is a layer that makes sure that you have your audit, have your budget on time. They do have penalties and consequences. South Carolina does not. My understanding is that you don't meet the state statute, there's a notation in your audit. What consequences may be, they really didn't know. But they know it does happen time to time, but you do have to have a notation in your audit, in your annual.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Who would like to be next?
My question is back to Jared. If we don't have a reading on the budget right, I mean, on the floor right now, as was proposed at our last meeting, the one, because it wasn't on our docket at that time or on our agenda to make that a motion. We was here for that time to make a second adoption of the motion. But that got changed at that meeting, totally changed at that meeting to where it's funding the money for. So that is actually not on the table right now. So we don't have to do nothing to that because that is really right now, Stan said,
So I'm coming to,
it ain't even there.
oh,
Is that not right?
the first.
I need you to walk through that a little bit.
Well, like when it was made, when the changes was made to it the other night, it wasn't up for that. That ain't what was on our agenda for that night. On our agenda for that night was the reading, or the second reading of the budget had been accepted. We was there for a second reading on that budget.
Yeah.
There was a major change come about that budget, and you're saying it can't be made until the next meeting. Is that not right? So we really don't have, only one we have on the floor right now is the first reading. Where they accepted, where it was passed 4-2 or 5-2, whatever it was. We go back to May when we approved that budget.
Hopefully I'll answer your
Yes,
question.
I'm not sure how to word it to you.
Let me take a stab at it. What I think you're saying is that the item on the floor back the prior regular meeting
Yes, sir.
was scheduled to be
I haven't heard
a
her
second
talk at all.
reading
Yes, sir.
of the original budget that had the 4 mills increase.
Yes.
No,
I think that's correct. Now, you're right that the motion made at that second reading to make a substantial change was approved and was voted in favor of. Okay. So what that then triggered was that the first reading on the floor would be at the next regularly scheduled meeting. So in terms of what's, I think your term was what's on the floor right now, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but yes, we have not voted on a first reading
Of the
amended budget.
Right. So it takes, after we vote on it next week, when we come back in council, it would take another 6 days or the next regular scheduled meeting to pass that, which will be way into July, right?
I think it's the first week in July, if I'm not mistaken, but yes, that's correct.
I just wanted to make sure.
So just so that everybody understands, our only option right now is to proceed and with the different options we have, which we're not going to meet the July 1st deadline. The only other way to do it would be to cancel the vote that was made at the last council meeting, which would set back into what the original was. But if we do that, that is going to take a 5-2 vote. So those are our only two options right now. Mr. Holder.
Well, the reason that I have been working hard on this, because council, the number one job of council is to get the budget approved. That's the number one job, is budget. And we haven't done that. And we were shocked last week when the changes came. And so we were looking at ways, what can we do to get a budget and be with what we're going to as council? And so we met and with some different council members and we talked about what it would take, and that's why we're here tonight. And thank y'all for coming. But I feel it's very important for us to approve a budget in a timely manner. And we have a way to do it. And it would be approved by July 1st, and it would be, everything would be legal.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Keating?
Well, I think the underlying premise of our ordinance, and if you read the paragraph instead of just a single sentence, the purpose of the renewal of an amendment after first reading is to ensure that any modified ordinance is reviewed by 2 readings, that no modification to an ordinance is enacted in one meeting. So therefore, the fact that, this change was reviewed with staff prior to the meeting. I mean, technically, you could say it was presented at the next regular council meeting. It was voted for first reading. It passed with the majority of council. It will go for a second reading in compliance with the intent of the ordinance on June 27th. Assuming that passes on the same vote of 4-3 or 4-2, then we have a balanced budget and we don't raise property taxes. Our ordinance acknowledges that there are changes that may be proposed between first and second reading. It acknowledges that some of those may be major. The reason the ordinance was changed to say we need to ensure that every amended ordinance is reviewed through 2 readings was the fiasco of the E-District and passing Appendix A in one meeting that nobody read and very few people saw. So in this case, we can argue whether it's significant or not because the total budget does not change. What changes is the source of $320,000. So, the difference is it comes from money that we're holding for some unknown purpose versus putting an additional burden on our taxpayers. We were just notified today that the county is raising taxes 3.5 mils. We know they are going to reassess property values next year. Our taxes are going to go up again. As a result of the reassessment, the net revenue to the town will also go up again. Because under the same 43 mils, they're going to get more money because I'm pretty sure all the houses are going to be assessed at a higher value than they are today. But the underlying premise of this meeting that we did not have a valid vote goes against every municipal governance and parliamentary procedure. The underlying premise of that governance is you accept the vote of the majority. The majority voted last time for a first reading to accept the modification to the budget. It will be heard for a second reading at the next meeting. Whether or not you want to argue semantics of what is the next scheduled meeting, I could argue this was reviewed with the administrator and the finance director prior to the last meeting. So therefore, it was presented at the next meeting. But, the fact that we are ignoring a vote of council, a vote of the majority to entertain the minority that is adamant about raising taxes is unconscionable to me.
Mr. Crockwell?
Well, I will start out with, I'm not for a tax increase. If you all remember, the first time the vote came up, I don't even know what the date was, but I did vote for originally what we had, which did include a tax increase. The last meeting that we had, I voted to not have a tax increase and take some of the money from the American Rescue Plan money. I have since, I don't know, within the last week or two, I have learned some information that I don't believe that we need a tax increase, so I'm still adamant that we do not increase our millage. I also believe that some of the things that have been done recently have contributed to our deficit. And with that being said, I also think that we should just kind of trim whatever we can from the budget and minimize how much we do take from the American Rescue Plan money. We should, as a council, decide what to do with that American Rescue Plan money in the near future, but that's neither here nor there. But eventually, within the next 2 or 3 months, we should start having some plans what to do with it, because it has to be planned ahead of time, and all of us agree, which is, as most of you out there can tell, we have a hard time agreeing sometimes. So I guess that's what I have to say on it.
Mr. Tinker.
I don't think there was any question that the vote they took was legal. It's not in my mind, and I wasn't here. I attended my granddaughter's graduation. But I've listened to it, and I didn't hear anything that was illegal. What changed was it was determined by the lawyer that the change was significant. And when that change is significant, there's another section of the Chapter 2, and it says that basically any major adjustment has to go back for first reading at the next regular council meeting. So we do not have a first reading passed. It wasn't on the agenda as a first reading. It was on the agenda as a second reading. Our ordinance says it has to go back to the original, back to a rewritten ordinance and presented on the 27th. Now, that's what we're looking at if we do not rescind what transpired on the 13th. And my understanding is I cannot ask to have it rescinded. It has to be for people that voted in favor of it. I think that's what Robert's rules say. So my objection is, and has been all along, is to fund operations, day-to-day operations from reserves. That's what taxes are for. We've increased and we all agreed to this. We all agreed to the people that we added. It's needed. They've accommodated us by pushing it out so that we don't go over the $18,000. And we thought we had a good deal. And I still think it's a good deal. I think that you're actually going to be deficit spending for 2 years because we can't raise taxes next year. And that's basically $700,000 that comes out of our reserves. I'm very much against doing that. I would like to see it rescinded, and we go on to our second reading as planned. But as it is right now, we have first reading at the next meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead.
Just to address a couple of things. First, I believe Mr. Coons, right? It's not an issue of being legal or illegal. As I see it, the sole issue is whether or not the change that was made at the last council meeting can be treated as a first reading of that new budget proposal, such that there could be a second reading within the July 1st deadline. Now, again, the points Ms. Keating makes are valid. This is one of those that, there's not a lot of Supreme Court precedent on such things like this for us to have some really clear guidance. I think certainly on the more conservative end in reading of it, recently modified ordinance would seem to say that we would need to have 2 subsequent hearings or 2 subsequent readings at 2 subsequent regularly scheduled meetings. Now, that's what I think is certainly the most conservative view of that ordinance. Now, I think a reasonable view could be that you perhaps could do it at that meeting that we did last time, but like I said, that there's not an issue of council having taken illegal action. The sole question is whether or not in compliance with this ordinance, that you could treat that, that modification and that decision as the first reading and then go forward to the next one.
Thank you. Mr. Drake.
As we went along with this process, I've made it very well known that I'm against any tax increase. The main reason is because I think our job as a council member is very, very important on our tax situation and guarding people's money. And I've sat here and every time we come up with this big plan of all these people we're gonna hire and all the stuff we're gonna spend money on. And then they come back and they dwindle it down. And then in the end, we go back with the same budget we had and it seems to work out just fine. And then we have a whole year where we don't even fund all the employees that we said we're gonna hire. We're not gonna fund them. They're funded, but they're not hired. Let me put it that way, they're not hired. And then toward the end of the year, we hire them up. And then we're gonna talk about hiring more people and more people. And now we're down to $320,000 for more people. I don't see it. And I think we need to keep moving forward. We need to get a balanced budget, and we can do that. It's gonna be past July. But that's fine, because we took the time to make sure it's right. And I don't think that just raising taxes is the easy way out. That's simple, but I feel that we can get this budget done, and it will work out, and it'll work out best for the residents of Surfside Beach. And that's the ultimate goal, is what's right for them, not for the police department, the fire department, the county department, or us, or anybody else. I think we all have to do it together. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'm the last one to talk about it, and the whole thing is I want to make sure that everybody on this council gets their voice. And everybody on this council got their voice tonight, okay? And when we run into the options on what we have, we only have two options right now. And the two options that we have right now is what we voted on last meeting, whether that's going to be first reading next time and whatever it's going to run us over. Okay. The other thing is to do away with what we did last meeting with a majority vote of council on that and go back to the original one. And the original one means that all the residents are going to be paying four mils in this. And I think that raising the mill for the residents should be the last thing that we try to do. And what we came up with an alternative for last meeting, I won't say first reading, but last meeting, was a way to do it without raising the mill to the residents and still being able to fund everything that was in the budget. Because we never took it, when we did the thing about transferring the funds, we never took any of the stuff that the council had proposed to do whatever. So, I mean, that's the reason I voted for it, because it protects all the residents in the town, and that's our job. And I remember 4 years ago when we had a debate when I was running for mayor, one of the questions came up with, what is the main job of council? And everybody sort of looked around, really didn't know. But the bottom line is, it's council's job to make sure that the budget's done. And that is our major job for the whole year. And now we are here at the deadline, and we've already shown that we're not going to make it. So with that, we only have two options right now. And the two options, and I'll repeat them for the last time, would be to revert back into the original option that we took, okay, which is going to take a 5-2 vote, or to keep on the track we're on right now, and we're going to be late in our budget. So with that, those are our options, and I will entertain any motion on the table.
Mr. Mayor, I still believe that it is within our power to acknowledge the valid vote of council at the June 13th meeting that allows the modified budget to be heard through 2 readings. and that entertaining the minority of council's opinion to start over and delay this process is ridiculous. We can acknowledge we have a valid vote on the table for first reading of the modified budget that will be heard for second reading at the next meeting. It's ridiculous to start over.
Do we have the ability to change an ordinance like that? If you've given us legal advice on the one thing, talk to me.
Well, the short answer is yes. Of course, I do not have a vote on council. It's council's job to ultimately make decisions and to ultimately vote. Now, the question is that if there was a vote and at the last meeting that was treated and voted on by council as the first reading. So we did that. Question now becomes, is there any problem with having a second reading at the next, the June 23rd meeting date?
27.
Excuse me, 27. My sole question that was presented to me was, is that, I think the proper way under the ordinance that should be 2 subsequent readings, that appears to be more likely the case. I think that's probably what that ordinance required. However, reality is council did vote at the last meeting. It did take a vote. It took a position. Now council can decide, given that my legal opinion, as is often the case, is indefinite and somewhat, is not a black and white issue. If council wishes to take a position that is within its authority to proceed with a second reading at the next scheduled meeting, the 27th, and vote on it that way, then that is certainly within council's ability to do so. Like I said, if I'm being asked, which is what I was being asked prior to coming here today, is whether or not upon a major change there was to be 2 subsequent readings, I think probably so. But as Ms. Keating notes, it could be a reasonable interpretation otherwise. Again, I think that is certainly the most conservative way to look at it, but council did take a vote. It took a position at the last meeting. It is within its authority, within its ability to make the ultimate determination, having heard my thoughts on it, to proceed with what would be the second reading at the June 27th regularly scheduled meeting.
Can you read the final 2 sentences of that clause? After it says the next regular meeting?
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I mean, the intent of the clause is to ensure that all ordinances, whether modified, are heard through 2 readings at 2 separate meetings, which is exactly what we're doing. It was to ensure that a modified ordinance could not be pushed through to adoption in a single meeting.
And Ms. Keating, you may very well be correct. I can tell you that there's nothing in the rules of construction or other things that identifies that legislative intent as to what it's trying to achieve. I agree with you that may very well have been the intent. That might have been what it was trying to achieve. However, in looking at what you were referencing and also looking at the plain language of the middle part of the ordinance, again, my view is that certainly the more conservative way to look at that would be to give the town and the citizens the additional notice of the 2 readings. But I acknowledge that a reasonable interpretation may be what you were saying. If council ultimately decides that we've heard you, but we think that we're within our rights, it makes sense for us to go forward and to have the vote on the second reading on June 29th, then that's certainly within the authority to do so.
Mr. Mayor, I go back to my 2 points. One is the agenda called for a second reading.
Yes.
So you can't have a first reading if it's not on the agenda.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
The first reading. No, this is the whole first reading, second reading, fucking stupid shit.
To the budget that was on the agenda.
Okay, and then my second point is, and you just alluded to it, is our ordinance that 4 members on this council voted for in 21. Any major amendment or rewrite of a proposed ordinance as a result of the first reading discussion shall be revised and represented for first reading at the next regular meeting. Now, we were having a second reading discussion, but to me, it's still a first, it has to come back as a first reading at our next regular scheduled meeting. Be rewritten and brought back at our next regular meeting, which is the 27th. Or we're just ignoring our own ordinance.
Well, I don't want to state the same thing or reiterate the same point. I mean, council.
This is the attorney.
Made a decision, took a course at the last meeting. Having been asked about it, I think that, again, the most conservative way of looking at it would be that, yes, it would be done in the way we're referencing. And yes, I think that's what the language says. That gives the public more notice, gives it 2 readings before a change. So probably so. Now, the difference is that there was a vote. And so the question is whether or not, given this review, is council seeking to abandon or to change the
vote
took at the last meeting.
Exactly.
But again,
I like this fucking
I use
attorney.
this, that you can proceed either with the position that we think within our authority.
Why can't you make a motion to vote revote?
Decision to proceed with the second reading at the end of the month and have a vote on it. Or you can take the position that we can't have it on the agenda, or the June 29th will have to be the first reading based on this statute, and then the second reading would have to be July 9th, I believe, July 7th, which obviously would put you back.
Mr. Mayor, how would we come up with, or how is it going to be voted on whether that was a first reading or not, since we done it on the other night? Who determines that was first reading?
Well, I think the motion was, if I recall, the motion was made that be treated as a first reading. And I may have to go back, I don't recall if that was specific, or just the amendment was voted
I
on.
thought she's getting out at 6:30. Yeah, fucking right. She's gonna be there for a while.
Call offhand if it was just to be treated as an amendment, or if it was to be treated as a first reading.
It was first reading of the budget as amended.
First reading of the budget as amended, okay. So if that's what the amendment was, I seem to recall it was just the amendment, but it may very well have been the first reading and amendment. So if that's what happened, then I think you'd have to presume that there was a first reading because council said it was a first reading. And they took a vote on it as a first reading.
Mr. Mayor, well, I am not aware of any Robert's Rules motion that applies to this ridiculous situation. But due to the sense of urgency we have in passing this budget and the fact that the majority of council has already approved a first reading, I would like to make a motion that we acknowledge a valid first reading of the modified budget reflecting no property tax increase, and proceed with the second reading of that modified ordinance at the next council meeting on January 27th.
Yes, bitch.
Or June, sorry.
So we're making amendments again here at this meeting that we
No,
called to discuss this.
No,
Here we are changing it again.
Hold on,
No.
let's, Mr. Stanley, repeat what you wanted to say.
I'm saying that we were called in here for a special meeting to consider what we have done the other night, is the way I understood it, and whether we wanted to rescind that vote. Then here we are trying to get a vote on the amendment, a new amendment to what was done the other night.
This special meeting was called to try to work out arrangements on the budget. It had nothing to do with talking about what happened the other night or whatever. it was for us to discuss our possibilities and what we need to do to get this budget taken care of. And our attorney has told us that, one of the things that we can do is we can count what happened at the last regular meeting as a first, and that's the motion that's on the table right now. So.
Correct.
Just on that motion, I need a second if anybody wants to second it.
Second.
All right, Mr. Drake seconded. Now we can have discussion on it. So anybody that would like to
Drake
discuss
seconded.
anything on it, then feel free to have at it.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
The manipulation of this process should have been done at the first reading. The first reading passed, and we went to second reading. Now, amendments could be made during the second reading, but the amendments that were made were considered major. That wasn't the word you used, considerable or something. I don't remember exactly the word you used. It wasn't major. I feel like the only way we can do this correctly and stay within our ordinance, which I've been preached at a bunch of times, is to have first reading on June 27th and second reading 6 days later or the next regular scheduled meeting. We can't have two readings at the same meeting, so we have to separate them by at least 6 days. And this was a major change. It should have been done at the first reading on the first, but they waited the last minute to make the change. And I think the consequences are that you can't go back and say that's first reading when it was for the second reading. So.
Anybody else have any comments? Well, our attorney just got through saying that we could.
If this was, yeah, I mean, to the extent that to a certain extent, the reading is what council determined it to be. Right? So if council, and again, my recollection was that it was a motion just to modify, but it may very well have been to modify and treat as the first reading. So if council voted on that, then whether or not it is compliant with the ordinance that was cited, council treated it as the first reading. And so as it stands, the next step would be, if I don't necessarily know that we need another vote to reaffirm that, but yes, council can make the decision that it's coming up, it's going to be on the agenda on the 29th for the second reading, and council chooses to go forward and vote on that as a second reading.
Well, we have a motion on that right now on the table.
So again,
So does anybody else have any comments before we have a roll call vote on it?
I do. I think this vote is going to be wrong. I think we're going against our own ordinances for what our ordinance say.
Okay, Sherry?
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Holder,
No,
Ms. Keating,
Yes,
Mr. Kinkin,
No.
Mr. Kreklaw,
No,
Mr. Stamey,
No,
Mayor Hellier.
Yes. So how did that go?
4-3.
Failed.
4-3, meaning that it did not count as a first reading.
Right, failed.
Okay, so, our only option right now is, and it failed as a first reading, so we know that we're gonna be late. Unless somebody wants to make a motion on the other, which is gonna take a 5-2 vote. Do I have any motions for that?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we go back and take the motion that was made on the first reading of the ordinance.
Repeat that again?
That had already been approved for second reading.
So you're asking to rescind the,
Rescind the vote that
Point
was
of
made.
order. You cannot do that.
and I don't understand exactly what you're saying. We already discussed that.
What I want to do, I want to get it to where we're voting the 5 to whatever it is to see if we can go back to first reading.
The 5-2,
Yes.
which is to rescind.
Rescind the vote, whatever, however it's to be worded. I want to rescind the vote that was made.
You can't rescind.
I can't do that because
No, because you were not,
I was on the opposite side. Right.
The first reading of last week still stands,
Yes,
whether we reaffirm it at this meeting or not.
yes.
How do you
We did
justify
pass
having
the
a
first
first reading when the ordinance said, the agenda said it was for second reading? It was a second reading that you amended. So that does not make it a first reading.
Well, we've already voted on the trying to make it a first reading and it got turned down.
Defeated.
So,
So it's not a first
I
reading.
mean, the next time we'll have the first reading on the next council meeting and we'll be late for the budget. I mean, that's the way that it ends up right now.
We have a legal motion and vote on the table. First reading, adopting the budget as amended in the
Yes.
discussions of June 13th.
Yes,
That was a valid motion and a vote.
yes.
It was not
Whether
valid.
the minority of this council likes it or not,
Point of order.
it was a valid vote. And it stands on the table now as an approved
Mr. Mayor.
first reading.
Point of order.
What's your point of order?
My point of order is it's getting way offhand of what we were discussing.
That's not. That's not point of order.
Yeah, okay.
Come on, Jerry.
Mayor, is there a question on the?
Can we keep arguing over this vote or not? You said it was illegal, I mean, it's not
Make a motion to
illegal,
adjourn.
but should be second vote being done next week instead of first. I mean, first vote should be done next council meeting.
We just voted on that to make it.
Well,
And that's
I
what
got
happened.
plans
and it
tonight.
failed.
Well,
I'm already late.
a couple of things. I think what you're asking is, again, I think we're getting a little bit confused.
I know.
The question is, did council vote already to treat this as a first reading, whether or not it was in strict compliance with the statute or not?
It was not.
Okay. And it might, and like I said, I'm tending to that more likely than not, it was not in strict compliance. However, that doesn't change the fact that council voted on it to treat it as a first reading at the last meeting. Okay. Therefore, if it comes up for second reading, that's why I'm saying I don't know if we necessarily needed the prior motion. If it's coming up for the second reading in June, council could vote on it then, or somebody could make a motion to continue it to the next, so that you've had two readings if the worry is staying in compliance with the ordinance. Okay. So again, is it the fact that something may not have been done in strict compliance with ordinance doesn't change the fact that the council took the action. And so council took that action. Like I said, prior to that, it's been treated as a first reading. So again, if the council is concerned about staying in strict compliance with the ordinance and wants to have the second reading extended, then you can do that and you won't be in compliance with the July 1st deadline.
Mr. Mayor, that's what we just voted on. That the motion was that we would accept the June 13th as first reading, and that was voted down. So
No,
our first reading is going to be June 27th.
no, no.
That's what was just voted on.
Sherry, would you repeat the motion?
It was to acknowledge first reading with modifications with a second reading on June 26th. Correct?
27th.
27th,
And that's what got voted down.
just now.
Yes.
Right, so basically what it is what, with the motion that was taken and put on the table and gone down, that just means that on the 27th, it'll be the first reading.
No,
Correct.
no,
Correct.
no, it will be the second reading.
It will
We
not.
still
We just
have a
voted on it.
standing first reading.
We just
We did
voted on
not
it.
rescind the last vote.
We didn't rescind the last vote. You can't vote something if you didn't rescind it.
We just did. We didn't
No.
rescind it.
No, you didn't.
But that wasn't a proper vote because it did
That's
not
not
follow
true.
our ordinance.
But you
That's
voted,
not true.
everybody voted for it. So
Everybody
that makes it a valid vote.
makes it available.
If it wasn't, then it would have been voted down. But it passed, so that
Passed.
makes it a valid vote. He's
So the next one will
saying
be
that.
second reading.
Not according to our ordinance.
But
It
the
was
attorney
deemed,
has
it was
said,
deemed this change was a significant change. There, I don't think anybody at this table had read the ordinance that calls, once you determine that it is a major change, you have to go back, rewrite it and have it at first reading at the next regular meeting. I don't think anybody that voted or at this table or in this room understood that.
but regardless, there was a
But that-
vote and it passed. And the attorney has said more than one time this evening that, yes, we didn't exactly follow the ordinance, but it's still a valid vote. Whether people understood it or knew what they were voting for, doesn't matter. They took a vote, it passed. That's it.
But they shouldn't have voted.
But that's,
It
but
passed.
shoulda, woulda, coulda. But that's what they did.
If you follow the ordinance, there should have been a vote.
But,
Council
Right,
can
but-
override that.
Oh, so we don't have to follow our own ordinance, is what you're saying.
Everybody's doing this stuff.
no, but
We need to talk this
What
out.
did, I would like to ask a question. What did we just vote on?
Cindy made a motion to,
To accept that it is a first reading.
no, she said accept it as that
to
we're
acknowledge.
acknowledgement, and we voted not to acknowledge it.
So we didn't acknowledge that it was a first reading.
But it still don't change the fact of the vote that was taken.
No, it does not change the fact.
The bottom line, I
but
think, to be on the
it
safe
changes
side,
fact
that on the 27th, we'll do
We still
the,
haven't made a
first reading and
determination
then the other one will do the
No.
second.
No,
No.
we have a valid first reading already. It's a reasonable interpretation within the urgency of the budget process to allow the first reading to stand as it was passed on June 13th. It goes to second reading on the 27th. If that passes, we're in compliance with everything.
Mr. Mayor,
I mean,
I'm trying to understand, we're arguing about something so stupid, that the fact that some want a 4 mil increase, and the others are looking at it as, we've got the funds, why don't we use the funds, and we don't have to have a tax increase on the millage? And everybody gets the thing funded, everything's fine, but we're arguing whether we're gonna get a 4 mil increase, or we're gonna use money we already have, is what we're arguing about. And if we can still meet the deadline before July,
That's the problem we've had with council ever since.
I mean, what's their
We've had-
intent? What's the intent here? The intent should be to get a balanced budget. The intent should be to look out for the residents and do what's right for the residents. That's the bottom line.
Tonight, we had a valid vote to say, to decide if we're gonna do 2 more readings. It was a valid vote to do 2 readings. Why would we decide other?
Mr. Mayor, Jerry, make a stand and tell us which way that it's legally done, which way we should be going by. I mean, stand up and tell the truth about how it's gonna be.
Let's.
I mean, you've told us 3 times, 4 times already.
Let's take the first things first with regard to Ms. Keating's motion that just went. Her motion was to essentially ask council to confirm her position. That was voted down. That does not necessarily, there wasn't a motion to interpret it otherwise. I mean, this was, she was seeking affirmation by council based on the wording of her motion. That reading was shot down. However, there is no motion on the table. It wasn't one then to take some alternative action. That is to say, to push back or to have second reading or to treat going forward. So as a threshold issue, I don't think that Ms. Keating's motion, having been shot down, is determinant of that issue. Now, going forward, obviously, when you give an opinion on this, you got to kind of look at it in totality. And as I've said before, obviously, the top priority is, or one of the top priorities is making sure that you get a budget within the deadline. Council is obviously very concerned with that, as it should be. Now, the issue of whether or not we were in compliance based on this change that happened at the second reading with this ordinance, like I said, I think the plain language would indicate that it probably more likely than not would mean that there would be a 2 subsequent readings at the regularly scheduled meetings as we talked about all day today. Now, again, though, I think that it is, particularly under the circumstances, probably reasonable to interpret that you could treat that amendment at the last reading as a first reading, and then the second one would be June 29th. Now, that's also what council voted on at that time, at that meeting. And again, so if we're proceeding on that course, then you can do that. I mean, again, the decision for council to make is to essentially take a course. Is it, in our judgment, do we think that it's reasonable to put the priority of getting the budget done by the July 1st deadline? Or is the priority in making sure we employ strict compliance with our ordinance? If it is the former, then I think we're within range to proceed with the vote at the end of the month, treating it as a second reading. If the goal is to show that we are maintaining strict compliance with town ordinance, then there would probably need to be a motion to have this heard as a first reading at the next, on the June 29th, 27th council hearing date, with the second one in July.
We don't have strict compliance with any ordinance.
That's exactly.
That's exactly.
And I'm fully acknowledging that, Ms. Keating, and you're absolutely right. So that's why I say, I'm being asked as the lawyer to give legal opinion. And so that's why I'm saying that what Mr. Kinlan has raised is a valid concern, is a valid issue. However, this is the reality of governing to a certain extent.
Right.
And so that's, on the one hand, I don't want to be a dead horse, but I hope I've answered everybody's questions as to what's the decision for council.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we have first reading of our budget at the June 27th meeting.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, how does that go against the fact we've already got one on the legitimate vote already on the table? It's already been voted on.
You have to rescind.
We have to rescind it, right? Before his could even be mentioned. Is that right?
Correct. What is the proposal is to,
To establish the 27th as the first reading of the town budget.
You have to
and
rescind
at
that
the last, and again, it's my recollection is a little bit different, but at the last meeting, we did vote to treat that as a first reading.
Yes.
So you'd have to do a vote to
So-
rescind.
Yes.
So yes, if that was the case, then yes, that would be a motion to rescind and amend that would require,
But if he's gonna rescind, he has to.
He has to be from the prevailing side.
He can't rescind.
He has to be a
He can't
prevailing
I didn't ask
party.
to be rescinded.
I'm just letting you know.
I asked that we do the right thing and have it on the 27th. And part of the reason not to use our reserves is we don't know what the pier is gonna cost. That has been our conversation all spring, is we don't know what that's gonna cost. We don't wanna use up our reserves and not be able to finish paying off the pier, or finish the completion of the pier.
The first reading that is on the table as passed does not use reserves.
Doesn't use any reserve.
Do what? It does reuse reserves.
No, it does not.
I don't think it does either.
How's the rescue fund not a reserve? Please explain
That
that.
is not reserves. Reserves are the statutory amounts that have to be held in reserves to support the town in the event of emergencies. American Rescue Funds is, additional federal grants that have to be allocated
That's just
within the next
semantics.
2
It's
years.
still reserves.
Well, it doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. we all know where we stand on this, so.
Let's do the right thing and just move it forward to the 27th. Am I correct on the date?
Yes.
And pass the budget 27th. We do our job, we uphold our job, and we get it to the state in time. And we have no tax increase to the citizens, and the other stuff that was budgeted is still budgeted.
And we start to accept the vote of council.
And we stop, start moving forward.
We ignore our ordinances and move on.
Well, we've already addressed all the ordinance issues that we have right now, so I just, I don't think we're getting anywhere, but, we do have an affirmed where we stand, and that we'll be taking a vote, whether it be first or second, or however we decide, on the 27th of June. So does anybody else have any comment before we adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.